We have to ask the question then, is environmental warfare even possible? It's kind of amazing, but even today there's lots of people that think that that technology doesn't exist. You might think it yourself. You might think, well, only God can control the weather. And ultimately, that's true. However, people have been dreaming about this, governments have been dreaming about this, controlling the weather for their own use for quite a long time. For example, back in 1954, this article came out in Collier's magazine, Weather Made to Order. Now, some nut must have wrote that, right? Well, actually, it was this nut right here. Only he's not a nut. He is, or was, the weather advisor to President Eisenhower. In fact, he was chairman of the advisory committee on weather control. Now, this is one of the things he says in the article. We could use weather as a weapon of warfare, creating storms or dissipating them as the tactical situation demands. We might deluge an enemy with rain. Flooding, massive flooding he's talking about here, to hamper a military movement, or strike at his food supplies by withholding needed rain from his crops. We're talking about creating drought. 1954, we're talking about this. Now, here's what he says, though, in the article about this and the other things, other capabilities he talks about. He says, I believe there's an excellent chance that the degree of weather control I have outlined can be achieved in 4 decades. This was 1954, so he's talking about the mid-90s. This is a U.S. Air Force research paper from 1996. And I direct you to the title of the paper, Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear about the military owning the weather, I don't like that. Because Yahweh owns the weather. And I think it's blasphemous for them to even suggest such a thing. But nevertheless, that's what this report is talking about. Well, how exactly would this work? Amazingly, the report actually diagrams the whole thing out for us. And this is how it works. What you see up near the top right is all the data coming in. Now, it mentions Gwen here. This is ground wave energy that's reporting what's happening with all of this. You can see the world there. You can see the magnetosphere around the Earth. You can see satellites there. you can see electromagnetic energy. So obviously they're monitoring all of that, they're doing things with all of that, and the information comes into them on their little computer. So what do they do with all that? Well, as you can see here, sync has an arrow that comes down to that computer and a number 1 that says intent. In other words, sync, which is, by the way, commander-in-chief, so that would be the president, says, okay, we have a problem with such and such a country. What are the options that we can do in the natural world to convince them that they ought to join with us in what we're doing? So they take in all this information and they figure out what the possibilities are of what they can do. And you see here, 2 wax mod options. Well, that's weather modification options. So that gets sent up to the president. They say, well, in such and such a place, we could induce an earthquake. In such and such a place, the jet stream is in a certain position. We could induce tornadoes. We could induce other kind of weather things. We could cause a drought, whatever. Here's the different choices of what we could do. The current technology at that time was recorded in a patent by a man named Eastland. Here's a copy of the patent, or 1 page of it. This was in 1987. So it was a current technology, and you can see the progression of all of this. And the patent itself talks about some of the capabilities. It involved being able to trigger earthquakes, altering weather, affecting human mental functioning, affecting human health, and all of this involved with affecting the ionosphere of the Earth's atmosphere. Slightly amazing that this is all in a patent from 1987, patents which came into the hands of the military-industrial complex that works closely with the military. In the summer of 2015, it was reported that the HAARP array was going to be transferred to civilian operators. Well, it turns out that it was transferred to a group funded by the military, so this isn't what happened. But nevertheless, people have looked at this and wondered, well, maybe HAARP really was just a research facility because they're not using it anymore. But actually, I think something else is the truth about it. This is David Walker, and again, you can find this on YouTube if you want to listen to it. the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Science, Technology, and Engineering. So he's one of the top science guys for the Air Force. And he was speaking to a Senate committee in March of 2014 and looking into the future, discussing certain possibilities of how HAARP could be disposed of. And during that rather lengthy Senate discussion, he said this.
The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it. And but that work has been completed.
This, I think, is a rather amazing statement from a scientist. And he's saying that they're moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere. So they think that they can manage the ionosphere. Now, please remember, the ionosphere circles the entire globe. If you're talking about managing the ionosphere, you're talking about something with global reach. And he even says here how it works to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it.